Welcome, everyone, to another Reuters Newsmaker and to the latest instalment of our Mobility Boardroom series. I'm Axel Threlfall, editor-at-large for Reuters. I'm delighted to welcome Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, and in just a short while, we'll also get Heidi Alexander, Deputy Mayor for Transport, to join us as well. Of course, how London or any other city, the size and relevance of London anywhere in the world is managing the overall impact of COVID-19 on its day-to-day functioning and its future is fascinating. On a host of issues with the mayor. At the same time, though, there has been much talk about how to make any recovery from the pandemic as green, as sustainable, as equitable as possible. And of course, a big part of that is the transport story, the mobility story that is so critical as cities grapple with the effects of massive economic, health and social challenges. So, as I said, we're also pleased to be joined by the Deputy Mayor for Transport, Heidi Alexander. Welcome to you both. I know, Sadiq, we've got you, and I think we're waiting for Heidi to come on, but let's start nonetheless. Despite all the enormous challenges you face, and we will come on to those, how much opportunity do you see here to rethink, to reset, to create some really meaningful, lasting change in our city?
Well, Axel, it's great to join you and be in Reuters. The first thing is that when you talk about this pandemic, this is the biggest crisis our city has faced since the Second World War. But you're right, and we shouldn't be embarrassed to use the word opportunity when it comes to this awful crisis. Of course, we always have in our thoughts the families who are still breathing and grieving for the loss of their loved one because of this pandemic. But there are opportunities. And one of the opportunities is how we return to a new normal, not to business as usual. And for London, the context is additionally post-Brexit. So we've got to think as a city, a global city, Europe's only global city, arguably, how we return to a new normal. Bear in mind the opportunities for a new Green Deal, the opportunities to transform our city and look at where people live, work, play, study, all those sorts of things. And mass transport has a huge role to play in, for example, the provision of homes, the provisions of universities, workspaces, leisure, infrastructure. And so there are huge opportunities here. And we're hoping, speaking to colleagues across the globe, but also working with our government, with the private sector and public sector, to have a new normal that is even better than what we had before the pandemic.
So are we, Sadiq, are we then we're giving up on this idea of preserving what we had, getting back what we had? What is this new normal? Very quickly, what does it look like to you?
Well, in London, what it looks like is London working close together when it comes to regional government, the local councils, we've got 33. When it comes to the private sector, the public sector, civic society, voluntary groups, I've set up something called the London Recovery Board, and I co-chair that with the leader of the 33 councils, Georgia Gould. And what we have, Axel, is a number of missions when it comes to our recovery. Some of those are around how we make sure we address the inequalities that have been not just shown by the pandemic, but exacerbated by the pandemic. And we also got to realize, Axel, we're a city of about 9-10 million when you include those coming into our city. But there are challenges vis-a-vis affordable housing, vis-a-vis affordable transport that's safe in the context of a pandemic, but also bearing in mind we're a city which has the largest number of foreign students of any city in the world.
Yeah. Heidi, I think we've got you. Are you there on the phone?
Yeah.
Mobility experience to tackle congestion, to tackle pollution, etc. Are you in a position to make that happen, or is the stranglehold, as the mayor called it, of central government just too tight to let anything really meaningful happen for a while?
So shall I have a go at answering that one? I mean, when you ask the question, what might life be like in a new normal when it comes to transport? I sort of think if we think back to our lives pre-COVID, we were all getting up at the same time. We were getting on the same buses and trains, creating congestion, crowding, and it adds cost to run that level of transport service so that you can accommodate your peak demand. And so I think what we've done with, government in the negotiations that we've had about our funding settlement over this year, and whilst we would have liked to have got a much longer term funding settlement, we've done 2 6-month deals now. We've built into that funding to ensure that we can enable more people to walk and cycle more often. Lots of journeys in London could be easily cycled. So we've invested enormously in safe, segregated cycling infrastructure. We've been able to get in 90 kilometres of new or upgraded cycling infrastructure since May, since we've been working on this. We're creating low traffic neighbourhoods across the city, creating school streets as well. And so whilst those funding negotiations have been very difficult with government, we have been able to get some money to ensure that we're maximising the opportunity that exists now to embed sustainable travel into the city.
All right. Look, I'm going to come on to TfL and the Transport for London and the funding issue in just a moment. But Sadiq, let me bring you back in here. This really inflammatory mudslinging between government and you guys, and we've seen it across the country, must be really distracting at a time like this. Must make it really hard for you to manage London's response to the pandemic, and Londoners are going to suffer as a result of that, right?
I think your analysis, your question is spot on. I think what should be happening is a grown-up conversation as adults between central government and regional government. And we should actually be united in trying to fight this pandemic, and united in our ambition to have London firing all cylinders as soon as possible. My view is, were it not for the fact that I faced an election next May, we'd be able to do so. And so what I'm hoping is that cooler, calmer heads prevail, and we can reach a long-term resolution to the challenges we face. The reality is, Axel, for the foreseeable future, we aren't going to be seeing about 4 to 5 million journeys on the tube every day. We aren't going to be seeing between 5 and 6 million journeys in our buses every day. And bearing in mind, as a transport authority, we as a city are far more reliant upon fares. About 72% of our services are provided by fares versus Paris and New York, whereas 38%. It's really important for the government to realise our ability to contribute to the country's coffers are inhibited by this sort of mudslinging.
Are you going to get another bailout in the spring, do you think, for Transport for London?
Giving with one hand and getting nothing back in return. When you speak to businesses across our city who contribute more than £40 billion net more than we take back, about a quarter of our GDP, they say one of the things that makes them do so is having a world-class transport authority. And our point to the government is, in the past, we've contributed much, much more than we've taken back. For this short period, we'll be able to have the passengers using our public transport system. We'll be able to have the fares coming into our transport system. For the foreseeable future. Just to give your watchers an idea of the compare and contrast, the privatised train operating companies who run trains across the country will give, and all we want is a level playing field.
Heidi, let's bring you back in here. I mean, what is the end game here, really? I mean, clearly something's got to give. Is it the government taking control of TAM, some kind of nationalisation? What costs need to be reduced? What is the end game?
Well, I don't think the end game should be about government taking control of Transport for London. I think the success of London as a city has really been underpinned by having a world-class integrated transport authority like TfL that is accountable to the mayor, and the mayor can take decisions about, the sorts of trade-offs that need to be made between, investment in the bus network versus investment in the, the rail, the tube network, and to be able to cross-subsidise our public transport system between those different modes of travel, I think is really important. And I think Londoners know who's in charge of TfL as well. And I think that that's a good thing, and that's a positive thing. I think it is true to say that in the next financial year, we are still going to need considerable government support to cope with the impact of the pandemic. So this year, the 2 6-month deals that both Sadiq and I have referred to, we've secured £3.4 billion in government support, most of that in grant, but some of it in additional borrowing facility for us. But in 2021 too, we have already set out that because of the reduced ridership, we believe that we will need £2.9 billion in 2021-22, and that's why we were saying, can we have a discussion about an 18-month deal here, so that we can focus on the things that are really important, which is,
Yeah,
sorry, I think you were going to ask something.
Yeah, I was. Sorry to interrupt you. In fact, let me bring Sadiq in here, and then I'd be interested to get your response as well. Don't we need to accept now, though, Sadiq, that the repeated requests for money can't really be the whole solution? There has to be fundamental change, surely, if rider numbers have changed for good.
I think what is happening is one of two things, or a combination of the two. One is the government's got to realise that the decision they made in 2015, before I became mayor, to remove the operating grant from our city, it was one that was, in retrospect, a bad one. What do I mean? You compare transport authorities from Paris to New York, from Hong Kong to Madrid, they receive an operating grant. We're the only transport authority in the Western world that doesn't. And so they've either got to return an operating grant to our city and or devolve more powers to our city. What do I mean? When you look at London, we get to spend 7% of the taxes raised in our city. Destiny. In fact, there was a report commissioned by the previous mayor. One or two of your viewers may have heard of him, a chap called Boris Johnson. And that was the London Finance Commission report. And that talks about devolving more powers to our city. And actually, if we had more control, more autonomy over the taxes raised in our city, we could decide where that is spent, and I'd be accountable to London. And I think the government's going to do either one of those two things or a combination of those two things for us to have a sustainable transport authority going forward.
I mean, I spoke to Andy Burnham about a similar issue. As you know, this has been in the news here recently. The devolution piece. Do we not need to accept, though, Sadiq, for the time being, we're not going to see a loosening of that stranglehold, and all the
Well, I'm the last person who wants to bicker, but if you're talking about devolution, a transport for the North, a transport for the West Midlands, and this government, it's been the cities and regions and the mayors who have been far more nimble, who know far more about their areas than, with respect to them, civil servants in Whitehall or the Prime Minister or his advisors in Downing Street.
Yeah, okay. Where is it really just a question of who takes the blame for what happens now, this whole TfL London Whitehall saga?
Well, no, I don't see it in that way at all, to be honest. I think there are some basic facts that everyone needs to understand. This time last year, Transport for London would have been bringing in about £13 million a day in fare income. We are now bringing in about 5 million. And so there's a short-term issue about how we deal with that lost fare income. There is then a more medium-term piece about how the pandemic has perhaps changed people's lives for good and what level public transport usage goes back up to. Now, even though, some people some of the time may be working from home more often than they did in future, I think in a big city like London, the mass public transport system is always going to be the sort of skeleton that underpins the way that the city operates. And so I think, as Sadiq has said, we can't afford not to get this right, because the success of London depends upon the public transport system, and the success of the UK depends upon the success of London. And so, I would like to think that over the next 6 months, we can have that more mature, grown-up discussion with government about, look, you need to understand how critical the London public transport network is, not just to our capital city, but to UK PLC. Yeah, and, sure. We can go on and talk about things like bus electrification and the impact upon the UK supply chain, for example. These things, if you want a green recovery, you can actually start to lead the way in London on these things.
Just a couple more things on this, because I do want to move it on. But Heidi, the idea of self-financing TfL is probably now a bit of a pipe dream, is it?
Well, as Sadiq has said, when you look at other public transport authorities across the world, the vast majority of them have some form of support from central government. And if we don't get that, then we will need to have greater devolution of either tax raising powers or a slice of existing taxes that exist. If you think about something like vehicle excise duty, every year Londoners pay £500 million a year in vehicle excise duty, and the vast majority of that, hardly a penny of it, actually comes back into London. It's actually is spent on roads outside of London, and so I think we need to look in the round at how we can, raise money for London's public transport system, critical as it is. But that needs to be a mature discussion that happens with government, as opposed to, what we've seen in the last year is 2 short-term deals with a whole load of different strings attached to them. And so we need to find a way of resetting the conversation about this.
Okay, so Sadiq, you said you're going to pay for concession fares for children and pensioners as part of this bailout. Simple yes or no. Does that mean we're going to have to see a rise in council taxes?
Well, one of the conditions the government attached was to remove free travel for under 18s and to remove the concessions that over 60s have. I think that's wrong. And so what I've said to the government is I'm unwilling to do that, and we'll have to find other ways to pay for those. One of the options we have is to increase council tax. Council tax is a very regressive tax. There are other options that we have as well. And over the course of the next few weeks and months, Axel, the top team at TfL will be finding ways to find the savings the government's required us to make, £160 million over the next 6 months, plus the savings required for 21-22, as Heidi referred to.
Heidi, another part of this is the congestion zone and extending that, and I know you've fought that. But this story today is about sustainability, it's about the environment. If you really want to tackle air pollution, why not extend the congestion zone in London?
Well, I think what the government were proposing in this set of negotiations was extending the £15 congestion charge that we've currently got in central London out to the north and south circular. You will be aware, and your listeners will be aware, that the congestion charging zone as it currently exists is just 1% of Greater London. That area that the government was talking about would have been an area 18 times the size of the existing zone. We've got a lot of small businesses located in inner London that are really struggling at the moment, and indeed household finances are under a lot of pressure. So a very sort of crude approach to this, which is what the government was proposing, slap a £15 charge on all journeys across and within the north and south circular by October of last year, didn't seem right or proper to us. Of course, in the Mayor's transport strategy, we have set out that over the longer term, we would like TfL to look at what technologically might be possible to create a more sophisticated form of road user charging. But, to try and put a £15 charge on all journeys across and within the north and south circular in October of next year did not seem the right thing to do. The other important thing is that, of course, in October of next year, we are expanding the ultra-low emission zone out to the north and south circular. Now, whilst 4 in 5 vehicles are already compliant with the emission standards, so won't be having to pay that charge, that expansion of the ultra-low emission zone in October of next year is, it's a really big project, and we've got to get that right. The camera infrastructure is going in as we speak in order to do that. But I think that really needs to be the focus for Transport for London and for City Hall in the next 12 months.
Can I just ask you something about the airports as well, Heidi? And I do want to get back to the general COVID context in just a sec. Heathrow in particular, I mean, right now we seem to need fewer airports. Is it time to drop all expansion plans at Heathrow? And should we be thinking about closing an airport in London, say London City Airport?
Well, Sadiq may want to say something on this issue. We have been clear in our opposition to the third runway at Heathrow. But, we're also, as far as I'm concerned, quite aware of the importance of aviation to our economy, and it is what makes London a global city. And so I think that would be premature to be talking about closure of airports. And, I think it's important at City Hall that we're working with big employers like Heathrow and the other airports, City Airport and those on the outskirts, because they do play, in normal times, a very central and critical role to our economy.
Okay, Sadiq, well, let's get your take on this. I mean, I talk about, I mentioned closing London City. I mean, is it something that's come up in conversation at all?
No, it's not one of the things we're looking into or advocating for. This pandemic has been catastrophic for domestic and international tourism, which has been catastrophic for Heathrow, but also businesses across London, not least in the central activity zone. One of the reasons for that is because of the failure to get a grip with the testing regime and to have increased testing, which Heathrow needs, Gatwick needs, City needs, our city needs, the City Airport needs, and our city needs as well. It's really important for us to try and make travel as safe as possible. And I know Heathrow are working incredibly hard trying to persuade the government to get a grip with the testing regime. What we were advocating for was a better Heathrow, not a bigger one. So yes, I'm against a new runway at Heathrow, but I'm very much also against Heathrow closing down.
All right, to the general COVID context, as talk of an effective vaccine, possibly the beginning of next year, injected some sort of optimism into your planning, into your
higher education institutions and laboratories to help with the testing regime. And I'm really pleased we have a One London approach. The news of the vaccine from Pfizer, but also the other vaccines being worked on, is a potential game changer. But it's really an immunity to manage ourselves through this pandemic. And one of the things, Axel, I'm most critical of the government for is not using the last 8 months to get a proper test, trace, isolate support system in place. But also when you speak to colleagues, and I know you do, and so does Reuters, they've managed to be far more successful managing themselves through this pandemic without the vaccine than we have. That's why it's really important for us not to let the government off the hook, because we now have the possibility of a new vaccine arriving sometime in the next few months. And by the way, it will take many, many months for it to be rolled out so all of us have the vaccination.
The current lockdown, I mean, I've got to say, I wonder, what your thoughts are on whether Londoners are obeying this new lockdown. It seems everywhere around where I am, the parks, the streets are teeming with people or with traffic. Do you think people have given up a little bit or are gaming the rules a little bit more than they did before? And should that mean there should be stiffer penalties for breaking the rules?
So here in London, most Londoners, the vast majority, for the last 8 months, have made monumental sacrifices because of the pandemic. One of the things that I was lobbying for with the government's own advisors and with others back before half term was to use the 2-week half term period in October for a short national circuit breaker. That would have meant we wouldn't have a long period of these additional restrictions, which of their experts and the lobbying from the rest of us, and we now have a longer period of lockdown. This national lockdown comes to an end on December the 2nd. We're working on, Axel, some metrics some ways of assessing where we are with this virus to decide when early in relation to tier 2 or the high levels. We're starting to see some progress. So the increase in the virus spreading has slowed down across London in 21 boroughs. It's not going down yet. So the R number, the reproduction number, is still above 1. It's between 1.1 and 1.3. We are still seeing an increase in hospital admissions and ventilator beds. What we need to see by December the 2nd is the reproduction number below 1, the virus going down, and that will lead to us being able to lift these restrictions. The key thing, though, is for this time to be used to get a proper boroughs have additional testing capacity for asymptomatic testing, as you'll see in piloted in Liverpool.
But you're saying, I'm reading, if I'm understanding this correctly, you don't think there's a case for lifting the current lockdown early in London. That's the first. In the 21 boroughs or whatever it is you said. Are you going to fight for a tier 1 or a tier 2 rather than a tier 3 restriction for the city?
Well, one thing I'm going to try and do very hard is to keep London united. So I'm going to work with the 33 boroughs. We have a one London approach. I'm keen to lift restrictions as soon as it's safe to do so. And that's when we look at the data. But the other point, and the other part of this story is businesses in particular, local authorities and vulnerable individuals need financial support. So I was really pleased the government did a U-turn to extend the furlough scheme until March. We need to make sure so that the boroughs and individuals who are isolating have support as well. What would be perverse is if it was disadvantageous to be in tier 1 or tier 2. Or tier 3, because it means they get support, otherwise wouldn't get in tier 2 and tier 1. That can't be right.
Yeah. Heidi, I will come back to you in just a sec because we're getting a lot of questions through on the transport bit in particular. But just to finish off this thought, are you not worried, Sadiq, though, given what you've just said about how to wean people and indeed the economy generally off support? It seems like Rishi Sunak can't actually end it.
Well, the thing is, when I speak to businesses across our city, the big multinationals, the chief execs there, or the small and medium businesses, none of them want taxpayer money. They're all desperate to have their businesses open again so they can be contributing to the economy, paying taxes. But the reality is many of our businesses, particularly in retail, hospitality, culture, tourism, rely upon footfall, and not least Transport for London. And for the foreseeable future, there won't be to be made redundant and unemployed. What we don't want is those businesses on a lifeline closing down. And that's why it's important in the short to medium term for there to be this helping hand, not just for
working from home, saving money, poorer people suffering. One, do you think, have you ever seen it more divided? And two, what are we doing? What are you doing specifically about that?
When you say divided, one of the things that we do know is this pandemic breaking. If you are in a manual job, you are 3 times more likely to die because of this pandemic than if you're in an office or managerial job. If you're a Black Londoner, you're twice as likely to die than if you're a white. Percent more likely to have lost your job than if you're a father, a man. And so this pandemic has highlighted some of the inequalities, these structural inequalities. And that's why your very first question about use the word opportunity. Should be one that addresses these structural inequalities that exist in our society. So, for example, I was really pleased on Monday this week to announce an increase in the London living wage, and the people are those key workers, the delivery drivers, the cleaners, the care workers, who are so important in this pandemic, but who are crucial in relation to their situation being rectified to not have an exacerbation of the inequalities in our city.
Yeah. Get to some of the questions from the viewers, and they do relate quite specifically to some of the transport stuff. So Heidi, let me bring you back in. A lot of people want an update on the e-scooter trials.
Some news that we can announce around progress on this. One of the things in London that is quite specific to our city is that whilst we've got Transport for London as the overarching transport body, we've also got 32 London boroughs, and what you wouldn't want is a trial whereby you could only use a rental e-scooter in one borough, but you then couldn't hop over into the next borough. People don't live their lives like that. We also want to be really sure that any trial that we run in London has safety at its heart. So we want to make sure that the actual e-scooters that are being used are the sort of top quality, highest safety standards. So we have been doing quite a lot of work with local authorities on this so that we can have a joined up approach. I think that Transport for London will be intending to sort of go out to procurement on getting some partners in to run the trial. And so, as I say, watch this space, because I'm hoping that some news may be forthcoming in the next couple of weeks on that.
All right. A question on car clubs as well, and the role they have to play in delivering the transport strategy that the mayor's laid out, in particular in terms of making electric and low emission vehicles more accessible to all Londoners. Any update on that?
Yeah, so we do see car clubs as an important way to enable people to actually reduce their dependency on cars, ironically, because if you don't own your own car but you're using a car club, you're less likely to use the car for all the journeys that you might otherwise do. And so we're really supportive of car clubs' efforts to green their fleet and to move to more electric vehicles. And so, we do want to see car clubs operating in London. Clearly, during the sort of period of COVID and the pandemic, I think people are perhaps a little bit fearful about the idea of, jumping into a car and, there'll be questions about, well, has it been cleaned since the last person has used it? But, once we're through this period, I do think that car clubs do need to be part of the overall mix and what the offer is in London.
Final question to you, Heidi, on TfL revenue, or revenue generally. It's something I've heard you talk about in the past, but working together with the private sector more, working together with operators like Uber, for example, on integration, co-generation of revenue, projects like that. Are we going to see you do more of that as we move forward? Because it makes sense, right?
Well, I think that one of the most important things when you talk about private hire operators like Uber, TfL is a regulator of those operators. And so the first thing to be said is that all of those operators need to play by London's rules. And so, if you want a more collaborative relationship with Transport for London, it's important you get the basics right first. And, over the last few years, we have had to take a number of difficult decisions at TfL about Uber in order to protect public safety. And TfL haven't shied away from doing that. And the Mayor and I have given TfL our support in taking those decisions. So, I guess my message to those providers is, play by the rules and help us. And then, if there's a broader conversation to be had about mobility in the city and how that is best facilitated, then we can discuss that. But, let's make sure that we get the basics right first.
On Uber, Sadiq, I mean, clearly the relicensing is being spun by many as a win for Uber. You're saying that this will allow us to continue to monitor very closely. I imagine you see it as a win for City Hall and TfL as well, right?
I think so. I think it's a win for Londoners, the fact that they've been put on probation again for a short period of time. They've not been given a blank check for 5 years. And the magistrate was quite clear in relation to the terms of the probation. And we want all businesses to succeed in London, whether you're a multinational big business or a small one. We welcome innovation, and in fact, we welcome disruptive technologies. But as Heidi has said, you've got to play by the rules. I don't care how big you are, how many lawyers you have, or how big your PR army is. You play by the rules. The same rules apply for the small businesses. They should apply to you as well.
All right. Let me come back to slightly bigger picture. We talked at the beginning, as you noted, about opportunity in the city. Where will we see the most meaningful change, do you think, Sadiq, moving forward? I mean, clearly working from home is an issue in the way people enter the city, more flexible working days. Where do you think over the next 6 to 12 months, we will see the most meaningful change?
I think there is change that could happen that is bad, and change that we want to happen that is good. The change that I'm trying to avoid happening is a situation where those places that rely upon high footfalls, our theatres, our museums, our galleries, our live music venue places, our coffee bars, independent restaurants, they close down because of lack of footfall. And the joy of living in London, our unique ecosystem, is lost, and thereby we lose our USP. We're going to avoid that. The good news is history tells us, Axel, whether it's in previous centuries with plagues and fires, or the last century with the Second World War and the Blitz, or previous decades with terror attacks. The biggest change for the good is a sense of people reflected upon their working lives and also their leisure lives. And so I don't foresee people working 5 days a week from home. I think people will choose to work 1 or 2 days at home. But also, as Heidi said at the beginning, I don't think you'll see the rush hour in the medium term that you saw previously, where between 6:30 and 9 and between 5 and 7, there's this massive rush hour because people are concerned, but also people are reflecting upon quality of life. I see that as an opportunity in relation to what we can offer as a city going forward. I think many of us have seen massive progress in use of technology. City, particularly bearing in mind we'll be outside the European Union, I see opportunities in relation to a new Green Deal and green jobs. I'm looking forward to the electrification of our buses, our taxis, even more people walking and cycling. Heidi gave you an amazing stat, which is that we have, since the start of the pandemic, 90 kilometers of additional cycle lanes. And to give your viewers an idea, when I became the pandemic, we've managed to treble it to 150. We've now added another 90 kilometers. That's led to a 20% increase in cycling. Our ambition, Axel, is to go from a good quality, affordable housing in our city. What's quite clear is people want not just good quality housing, but good amenity space as well. And so we'll continue to invest in planting trees, but also in preserving our green spaces, and in fact having more as well.
Heidi, lots of questions on this, on the net zero targets and electric battery charging and the sort of infrastructure that's required there. A lot of people saying that that infrastructure isn't there yet and it's taking too long. Have you got any update on that for us?
Well, we're continuing to put in additional 300 that TfL have put in by the end of this year. But you raise a good point about electrification of the bus fleet as well. We've got 77 bus garages in London, one of which at Waterloo is fully electric. A number of other bus garages, only a handful though, have electric charging facilities there. And so whilst we're buying more electric buses at the moment, what we actually need to do is sort the infrastructure out so that you've got the power upgrades at the bus garages in order to be able to do these things. And so we're really keen to bring forward the sort of zero emissions target for the bus fleet from 2037 to 2030, but that will require significant investment to do that, and that's why we have put that in our CSR bid to government to say, talk to us about how we can lead the electrification of buses in the UK, because there is a massive opportunity around that at the moment.
All right, Sadiq, just a couple of final questions to you. Of course, we've got the mayoral elections coming up, I believe, in May next year. I mean, I don't really know how else to put this, but if the bickering between Whitehall and London continues in the sort of inflammatory way that it is now, this mudslinging, as I called it earlier, and the resulting deadlock continues, can you really win that election?
Well, let me unpack the various points raised in your question. Park the election for a second. I think it's really important for there to be no bickering and mudslinging. We should, as politicians and officials, work out what the needs are, what the government can afford to pay, what we can afford to pay, to have a proper plan going forward. I think this mudslinging, this bickering benefits nobody, and Londoners expect more from people elected to represent us. And so I'm not somebody who is an advocate of mudslinging. So it's really important. But I won't be afraid to stand up for our city. And I won't be afraid to champion our city and to fight for our city. And so what I say to the government is, let's work as grown-ups in a closed room and find a resolution. So far as the election is concerned, once the campaign begins, I'm more than happy to fight that campaign based upon my record over the last 5 years. It'll be 5 years by the time the election comes. And it'll be a contest between, frankly speaking, two candidates, one from my party, one from the Conservative Party. And Londoners will have a choice to have a mayor who's in the pocket of the government, or a mayor, as I've been, as somebody who stands up for our city.
Yeah. I knew, I was just looking at my notes there, and I knew there was one other thing I wanted to ask you, and I wanted to raise that tweet you wrote to Joe Biden. And looks forward to working with you. Time to build bridges, not walls. And as a resident of Hammersmith and Fulham, the irony of that comment was not lost on me, given Hammersmith Bridge has been down for so long. Can you tell us anything about Hammersmith Bridge and what's going to happen there? And I asked that rather selfishly.
No, don't apologise for asking the question. Look, so we've got more than 20 bridges in our city and tunnels as well. Some of them we own, Transport for London, some of them councils own, some of them are owned by the corporation. This bridge in Hammersmith and Fulham is a really important bridge. It's an artery to many parts of our city, the south side of the river and the northern side of the river. The council owns the bridge, and it's a bridge that's almost 200 years old and has got real problems with it for many, many decades. The council hasn't got the money to repair the bridge. We, Transport for London, haven't got the money to repair the bridge. I've made a number of requests to the government to support us, going back more than a year, to help repair that bridge in terms of a temporary walking and cycling bridge, in terms of a ferry residents need and businesses need, which is a bridge that has been reopened. I'm going to ask Heidi to give you an update in relation to the work Heidi's been doing on my behalf on the task force, which has recently been set up. And what I'd say to, again, the government respectfully is the residents and businesses around there reopen safely as soon as possible. And again, let's get around the table and resolve this. But I'll let Heidi just give you the updated details of where we are in relation to reopening this bridge.
Okay, very quickly, Heidi, because I where we are on the time. Go ahead.
Task force, we've been in conversation with government and submitted funding applications on 3 separate occasions over the course of the last 18 months. The task force was set up a couple of weeks ago. I think the critical thing now is to get the first phase of repair works done on the bridge, which is sort of stabilisation works. It costs probably about £16 million. TfL has got money it can put in. We're waiting for the government to say what money it can put in. If we can get that first phase of stabilisation works done, we can get the bridge reopened, both to people who are walking and cycling, but also the vessels underneath it. At the moment, the RNLI can't go underneath it, and that's a real problem. And so that's what I've been pressing the minister on repeatedly in the task force meetings. In fact, the first meeting on the 23rd of September, I said, we've got to get this done, because if we don't have that bridge reopened by, autumn of next year when the schools are going back, we will have failed the people of Barnes, we will have failed the people of Hammersmith. And so the sooner we can get agreement on the funding package for that first phase of works, the sooner that life can return to some normality for people in that part of London.
All right. Great, Heidi. I got a little bit parochial there, so apologies to our more of our global viewers for that. Final question to you, Sadiq. I mean, you clearly, where you're sitting, I mean, you see this from both sides. You talk about central government a lot. You talk about not wanting to bicker. Maybe you should sit on the other side. Have you ever wanted to go national? Would you ever run for Parliament?
No, I spent 11 years in Parliament. I've got the best job there is just in politics, but generally speaking, I think the future is cities. Somebody once said if the 19th century was a century about empires, 20th about nation states, the 21st century is all about cities and mayors. I've got the best job in the world. I'm looking forward to reapplying for my job next May and hoping that your viewers in London will lend me their support.
What do you want to be remembered for? Okay, I'm not saying you're leaving before May next year, but when you eventually do go.
A number of things: improving the air quality in our city, greening up the infrastructure in our city, affordable homes in our city, making sure that our ecosystem, whether it's culture, whether it's tech, whether it's finance, whether it's higher education, whether it's life sciences, continues to be the ecosystems that it has, continuing to make sure that all Londoners have what I did, which was the London Promise. The London Promise is very simple. You work hard, you get help in hand, you can achieve anything. Our mission in City Hall, whether it's Heidi or me,
Look, I've got to stop it there. I want to thank you both, Sadiq and Heidi, for your time today and your candor. And look, we of course, there's a lot of politics to talk about. Clearly, such an important part of the opportunity, as I said at the beginning, coming out of this pandemic. So Sadiq Khan and Heidi Alexander, my thanks to both of you. And thanks to everyone for watching another Reuters Newsmaker. We'll see you very soon.
Stay safe. Take care.